Welcome back, and now we turn to some decisive action taken by President Obama this week. On Thursday, the president commuted the prison sentences of 8 people who faced fairly long terms for drug crimes, many of which are no longer on the books. The president's action means that Clarence Aaron will get out of jail. He is a man who was sent to jail in 1993 on harsh drug charges. Aaron was not convicted of drug possession, purchase, or sale, but he was linked to people who were, and he ended up receiving a life sentence. His case was spotlighted by MSNBC's Daphne Linzer and reporters at Frontline as a heartbreaking example of the excesses of the war on drugs. In fact, Aaron's case became one of the stories from America's incarceration crisis that has led many to rethink our war on drugs as people ask, how can we send so many young men and disproportionately poor and black men to prison for decades or for life for nonviolent offenses or for being in the wrong place at the wrong time? There are several factors, of course, that drive this kind of punitive set of policies. The rise of plea bargaining over jury trials, an explosion of mandatory minimum sentencing at the state and federal level, and old laws that punish drugs like crack far more than cocaine, some of which are no longer on the books. Beyond taking executive action, the Obama administration is also advocating reform to drug sentencing in Congress. Attorney General Eric Holder laid out the stakes in August.
As the so-called war on drugs enters its 5th decade, we need to ask whether it and the approaches that comprise it have been truly effective. Too many Americans go to too many prisons for far too long and for no truly good law enforcement reason.
Joining us now for an important discussion, Daphne Linzer, managing editor for MSNBC.com and author of that groundbreaking series on presidential pardons, Shades of Mercy. Attorney Faith Jenkins here at the table as well. And Michael Skolnik, director of the documentary Lockdown USA and editor of globalgrind.com. Thank you to all of you for being here. Daphne, I want to start with you. You've been working on this reporting for a long time. Tell us everything you know after this decision yesterday.
Yeah, well, I think that you really kind of bring everyone right to the place they need to be, which is that Clarence Aaron was an extraordinary story to begin with, because of the length of sentence, because of where he was sort of in the middle of a drug conspiracy, as you said, not the buyer, the user, the seller, right. The supplier, just somebody who introduced a couple people who and then became part of a conspiracy. Those were the facts when I first got to his case and his story. But what really changed the game for me was when I learned that he had tried to get a pardon at the end of the Bush administration. He had tried to get his sentence commuted so that he could leave prison early after 15 years of serving. And the pardon attorney prevented his release, withheld facts in the case from the White House. And this was, of course, unknown to the White House for some time until we sort of uncovered the facts and were able to say, like, this is a guy who, A, look at the way he was treated in the system anyway to begin with, and then B, when he tries to become a recipient of presidential mercy, one person stands in his way and prevents him from doing that. So the result of our work is that there was an investigation by the Inspector General, confirmed the findings, said that the pardon attorney had misled the White House, said that the pardon attorney did not live up to his responsibilities to the President of the United States. The White House knew this. They asked him to recuse himself. They did a new review of the case. And then, of course, we know what happened yesterday, which is that the President decided to release Clarence Aaron from his life sentence.
And I understand you've heard from his family as you've been on top of this.
Yeah, they're elated. I mean, incredibly emotional, and I know that he is too. This is something he has been waiting for. Even a year ago, you know, when the findings first came out about what was happening inside the pardons attorney to try and prevent his release, he was hopeful.
Well, and Daphne, what you talk about is that feeling that the system isn't working and it isn't working fairly at each step. And Michael, this is something that your work and your documentary look at. And I just want to, people know, but I want to remind people, if we put up some statistics here on the screen, Hispanic and Black Americans far more likely to receive a mandatory minimum sentence for the same types of crimes. Speak to that predicate issue in how we end up with this unjust prison population in the first place.
Yeah, I think as we look at the criminal justice system as a whole, the whole system doesn't work. And what's been incredibly encouraging over the past 9 or 10 months from the White House, from the Department of Justice, is that the president is saying enough is enough. I'm going to put out a bold statement, which he did yesterday, by pardoning 8 non-violent drug offenders, knowing there are thousands more who should be pardoned, but challenging the Congress to do their job, challenging the Congress to once and for all pass this law, that reform these drug sentencing, mandatory minimum sentences that just don't work. And as you said, and you pointed out in your graph, they're not just unjust because they don't work, they're unjust because they're racially disproportionate. They're sending black and brown people to prison. 93% of drug cases in this country take a plea bargain because they have this threat of this mandatory minimum sentence, and they threaten these young guys, and they lock them up.
It's hanging over them. And you mentioned the Congress and the action here, Michael. It's very important to understand when we look back in the 80s when these mandatory minimums were instituted at the federal level, both parties overwhelmingly supported them. And now we're seeing something very interesting, which is members of both parties saying this has gotten out of control. Faith, take a listen to what Senator Rand Paul said at a hearing speaking to this issue, and he has backed a bipartisan proposal with Democrat Pat Leahy to change these mandatory minimums. Take a listen.
If I told you that 1 out of 3 African-American males is forbidden by law from voting, you might think I was talking about Jim Crow 50 years ago. Yet today, a third of African-American males are still prevented from voting because of the war on drugs.
Faith?
We may as well call the war on drugs the war on black and brown people. No group has been impacted more against these policies than the African American community. The racial disparities are completely staggering. But just stepping outside of the statistics, as a prosecutor here in Manhattan, the first time I walked in drug court, I was simply stunned. Day after day, I was assigned in drug court, and 95% of the room would be filled with African American and Hispanic defendants. And the ACLU has put out the statistics. White people actually use drugs more, but the statistics are that black people and African Americans are arrested and incarcerated 10 times at a higher rate than white Americans. So the statistics are out there. We know the problems are there. As prosecutors, we see it every day. It's just a rolling and revolving door of people coming in and out of the courtroom. And we have taken people who really need help and need treatment, and we're incarcerating them.
Well, and it goes, Faith, to agenda setting as well. Your reporting is a piece of this, as is other people's work. We heard a press conference today where people talked about what the president's done, right? This issue was still not on the agenda of a lot of the reporters in that room.
That's right. I think that they're thinking much more about sort of policy in Washington and politics, and really not about how some of those decisions that are made inside the White House, either through acts of executive clemency or urging the Congress to step up on mandatory minimums, is really affecting everyday lives of millions of Americans. There are so many people in this country who are incarcerated. Even as the ACLU said, more than 3,000 people who are serving life sentences for nonviolent crimes. Many more who are stuck in the crack cocaine sentencing pipeline, who everyone agrees are serving sentences that no one thinks they should be serving, and yet are stuck there.
Or have been rolled back.
Right. I think that the president is very, very wise to have pushed on Congress to make changes. I think he also has the authority to do more. I think this is a president who said yes to 8 people yesterday, and this is a president who has said no to 5,000 others who have sought early release from prison during his presidency. So I think that he has powers. This may be a test for him of how people receive those powers, but I think that it's been positive so far, and he could do more.
No, and I think that context is an important place not to leave the story, because you've been reporting on it for a long time, and you and Michael as well, and we're going to keep on this. So this is not a story we're going to drop. Daphne Linzer, Faith, and Michael, thank you for your time. Appreciate it very much, and you should stay with us because we have the day's top lines straight ahead.